is episode 2 of the Friday Fantasy Football Talk Show, where I will just be, again, going through fantasy football and treating it as we do a lot of other games, role-playing games and other type of games.
New show.
Have to focus, concentrate, use our wits, use our guile, and hopefully craft the team that performs on Sunday. So this week, there's really not that much to go over. So what we're going to do is kind of go over the one game that did happen this week, looking at it from a fantasy football perspective, and look at some of Sunday's upcoming matchups, and how there are some go-to games, some games that have some really interesting fantasy implications, either because they have new players, new talent, and from that perspective, we're going to try to go into this and give a more nuanced perspective of all that's going on in the football world, and especially as it pertains to this upcoming season. Because what we have week 1 is, we've been kind of tracking these players. We've looked at the charts. We've read all the rankings from all these experts and seen where we think players will fall. We got to watch a little bit of them in the preseason, but week 1 is different. Week 1 games count. Teams put forth their best efforts usually, but at the same time, they're still trying to figure things out. They're still trying to get a handle on their playing, their ability, what's going on in their systems. And we saw a little bit of that last night, so we're just going to go over last night's game, stat-wise first, and then kind of break into maybe a little bit further analysis of what these two teams have going forward. So it was a win by the Patriots. As you can see, there's an NFL photo show, so we'll go through that kind of quickly just to show you. But some of the key players in the game, Tom Brady had a really great game, 4 touchdown passes, no interceptions, just a really solid game overall. I mean, I think he threw 4 incompletions during the course of the game. We'll go deeper into the stats in a second, but it was just an all-around great performance from the Patriots. Julian Edelman's another player who had a really good game. He didn't score, but at the same time, he was a high target guy, and those are the kinds of wide receivers you look for. And Edelman wouldn't have cost you that much in a draft, so he's going to be really good this season, especially with Brandon LaFell being put on the PUP list. He won't be available till at least week 6. So Edelman is going to have a lot of targets in the passing game early. Another player to look for on the Patriots is Dion Lewis. I'm sure there's a photo of him in here somewhere. We'll get to that guy. Rob Gronkowski had a phenomenal game. 97 yards and 3 touchdowns out of your tight end. He was probably worth a round 1 draft pick. Usually you don't see people going for tight ends that high. I actually, last year in the money league that I ended up winning, went Jimmy Graham that high. If you have a tight end that can get you a consistent amount of fantasy points week in and week out, that's huge. Mainly because the position is so in flux. There's hundreds of things going on at one time or another, and it's hard for people to understand that I might have to stream this tight end week to week and not know what to expect out of him, not know what you're going to get, and that's really problematic in fantasy. But if you know you can get big numbers from a tight end every week, and we'll show you his numbers in just a second, but big numbers from a tight end every week is huge. And Rob Gronkowski looks primed to do huge things in this offense. I mean, you got to key on him, but at the same time, he's such a matchup nightmare. He just looks like he's going to be great this year in fantasy. We already talked about Tom Brady. Obviously, a lot of these are going to be Gronkowski stuff because he was doing so much work yesterday. But this is Dion Lewis. He had a fumble that was recovered by Gronk, so he didn't end up losing any points for that. But he had a decent game. He had a good amount of passes out of the backfield. He was at about 12 fantasy points in standard leagues. About 69 rushing yards, 51 receiving yards. Just nice balance. He was a nice balance attack. again, he's only going to be filling in for probably 2 weeks, and then, you know, back to Bellatrix as usual. And he also didn't get the goal line carries. Bolden was getting the goal line carries, and he wasn't able to do anything with them, really. He wasn't able to punch it in. He wasn't able to get a score. And they ended up using, you know, 2 and 3 tight end sets on the goal line for the Patriots, and that's how Rob Gronkowski got one of his touchdowns. Scott Chandler, a former Buffalo Bill who was a really good player for the Bills, a really solid tight end for the Bills, who's now playing secondary tight end, got a touchdown off, you know, similar motion. I think it might have been his only catch of the game, but again, 6 points, 6 points. So Dion Lewis is potentially a flex play next week at Buffalo. Buffalo has a really good defensive line. Their linebacking core is kind of in flux. They lost Kiko Alonso in the trade to LaShawn McCoy. They didn't have them all last year, and the defense was very good. So it's kind of a questionable call of where Dion Lewis is going to be next week. We'll look at it next week. He might be a player to watch. But he's a player that's available in a high percentage of leagues, so you can go out and get him if you desperately need a flex play next week. And I think he shouldn't be too hot of a topic on the waiver wire because he played the Thursday night game. And everybody's going to be looking to Sunday and what is going on Sunday and who's going to pop up, who's going to be the Cecil Shorts of this year, who's going to be the Ace Robinson to Jaguars, ironically enough. Or who's going to be, are there going to be any major injuries that's going to push somebody up the depth chart? Is Jamal Charles going to go down so Niles Davis can come up? Like those kind of things. So I think people aren't going to really jump on Dion Lewis, or if they do, it will be, you know, an afterthought kind of waiver wire ad. So there's still a good possibility, a strong possibility that he'll be there, and he's potentially a player that you might want to look at. So we'll go to the other side of the ball. The Steelers, D'Angelo Williams had a really, really good game. Again, no touchdowns, and that's partly on the Steelers' offense. The Steelers' offense was really good last night. They had, I think, 400-plus all-purpose yards. But at the same time, they didn't score a lot of touchdowns. They were bogged down in the red zone. They missed 2 field goals. They had a goal line stand go against them. So Mike Tomlin said it best. They didn't execute. They didn't execute in the red zone, and that's where your fantasy points come from. D'Angelo Williams looked really good, really fresh. Only problem, what D'Angelo Williams demonstrates is Pittsburgh's offensive line is a great running offensive line. And what that means is Le'Veon Bell, who a lot of people had as a top pick, even with his 2-game suspension, is going to have a very good season. So if you were lucky enough to have Le'Veon Bell, the holes that D'Angelo Williams was running through, and knowing Bell's explosiveness and power, it's gonna be a good season for Le'Veon Bell if he can stay healthy. And I think just 2 games less of a season might not be the worst thing. He might be fresher going into the home stretch of your fantasy football playoffs, and it overall looks like it might be beneficial, especially because it seems like the Steelers' offense is not going to really miss much if D'Angelo Williams plays like this next week. Now, D'Angelo Williams, like Dion Lewis, is an interesting ad next week. Although the Pittsburgh Steelers have a tougher defense, I believe they're going against next week. And we'll, again, look at that schedule when it comes to, for episode 3. We'll go through that on Friday. But D'Angelo Williams, interesting player, interesting pick. Ben Roethlisberger had a game. 1 touchdown, 1 interception. Threw for a lot of yards, but at the same time, really didn't do that much in standard leagues. You would think with the Patriots' defense not being really valued and losing so many cornerbacks, that he'd get a couple more touchdowns. He got a real late one to Antonio Brown, which, I mean, garbage points count in fantasy football, so it's a touchdown. But at the same time, it was a rough game. Will Johnson had the other touchdown. Marcus Whedon, who was kind of a flyer pick, who I thought would be more involved in their offense. He was targeted. He maybe got 6 targets all total. But it looked like Darius Hayward-Bay was more utilized is the deep threat, which is kind of worrisome. Not that Marcus Whedon was going to cost you a high round pick, but just the fact that you expected him to be one of the players to help your fantasy team at least for the first couple weeks. Let's go through our league and see how the Twitch.tv draft that we did is going, using only the Thursday night game. So, as you can see, our draft was based on picking two wide receivers. We had Antonio Brown and Dez Bryant as our first two picks. And Antonio Brown, 133 yards, touchdown, 19.3 fantasy points. Really good start for a Thursday night. You get up about 20 points. You only utilize one player. The other team is built similar to you, so you don't have to chase anything. You have Dez Bryant. It's a good start for the team. Good start for the team. And as you can see, Sperry had both Rob Gronkowski and Tom Brady. He also started Edelman, so Patriots fan, obviously drafted a lot of Patriots. Rob Gronkowski, 27.4 fantasy points. Tom Brady just beat him out by 0.2 in standard leagues, but 27 points from a tight end. That's so huge. That's massive. Julian Edelman, like I said, 10.6 fantasy points, 97 receiving yards, almost 100 receiving yard game. Very solid. As you can see, he's owned pretty much universally, and he's probably going to be the main target. 11 total passes on 12 targets. So he's catching short stuff. He's only catching 8-9 yard passes. But in a game where wide receivers can be so finicky, can be so week to week, where there aren't that many huge prime game-breaking players, a player who gets 12 targets a week is invaluable. And that's why I think Edelman is going to be good this season. We have, some people, another person who, both kickers in this game had bad games. Gostkowski was the victim of the Patriots' success. The Patriots got into the red zone and scored touchdowns. So he only had 4 extra points. Sweezum missed 2 early field goals that would have given you an easy 6 points. Then he had 2 extra points, and actually lost one extra point because the Pittsburgh Steelers went for the 2-point conversion and succeeded. That's why Whedon got to a 7.5 fantasy point game, which is mediocre. But it's probably good enough that we can say, okay, he had a game where we can feel kind of okay about what he did. And, it helps that every little bit helps in terms of Whedon's never going to be your number 1 receiver. He's probably your number 3, either, flex play, or if you have a play in a 3 wide receiver league, he's probably a 3-level wide receiver. But 7.5, you might have expected a bigger game from him. You definitely expected him to be targeted more. And I feel like Ben Roethlisberger focused on, instead of getting to Antonio Brown is going to get your short stuff. Intermediate stuff to deep passes is where I thought Whedon would succeed. And had, if he has 4 catches, 5 catches for, 80 yards and a touch, that's a huge game. That's a great game. But instead, he was more along the lines of a 3rd, 4th option. It seemed to go Antonio Brown, then Heath Miller. And if Heath Miller is still available, he was targeted a lot by Ben Roethlisberger. It might have to do with Le'Veon Bell not being able to have the back out of the backfield touches, but it was a really, really impressive showing for Heath Miller, especially given how, seasoned Heath Miller is, not old, seasoned. But really good game for him. A lot of targets, and a couple interesting plays where you would think back shoulder throw to Whedon in the end zone. No, a lot of stuff to Heath Miller, trying to feed him get him a touchdown. So it's good to see the Pittsburgh offense is progressing. I think they'll get better as the season wears on. I'm not sure about Weeden. I'm positive if you have Le'Veon Bell, you're going to be happy with him. And DeAngelo Williams, in the meantime, is a really solid replacement. So it's only one more week, and we'll look at the Pittsburgh Steelers next game. We can check that actually right here. Their next game is against San Francisco. San Francisco, on paper, sounds like a bad matchup just because of how good the San Francisco defense has been over the course of the last couple of years. But they've lost a lot of players to the retirement, due to injuries, due to changes in the team. The team is actually picked to finish pretty low in the NFC West. So that might be a game where you're not as scared as you used to be. Again, it's also at home in Pittsburgh, so it's a West Coast team traveling east. That for a 1 o'clock start game, so it could be a really good game for the Pittsburgh offense. And so DeAngelo Williams might not be a bad play there. The 49ers are without Aldon Smith, who's no longer with the team. They're without Patrick Willis, who's no longer with the team. Navario Bowman's coming off of an ACL tear, just getting back into it. They're without their other linebacker, whose name escapes me right now, but he's retired due to concussions that he suffered throughout his career. They've lost several corners. It's just in rebuilding mode 49er team. You don't have Jim Harbaugh in there. You don't have Jim Harbaugh there anymore. He's now coaching Michigan. It's just a team in flux, and that means that you, as a fantasy player, have to see that and then go, what used to be a scary play might not be as scary anymore. Same with Seattle. Seattle's a vaunted defense, but Cam Chancellor is not there. Brandon Bauer is not there. You have players who are now on different teams, who have moved on, who have signed, like the dude signed with the Eagles, their secondary. They're not the same team that they were last year, and that's why Week 1's so important. You gotta get eyes on teams. You gotta get eyes and see what players are going to be out there for you for the long haul. And I think that goes through probably most of the important stats on the Pittsburgh Steelers Patriots game. But at the same time, I think that it was worth noting that it was probably a closer game than it realized.
If you're a free-range chicken, you roam free. It's what you do. If you want to save 15% or more on car insurance, you switch to Geico. It's what you do.
So we have Ben Roethlisberger's 350 yards, DeAngelo Williams 127 rushing yards. The one rushing touchdown did not go to DeAngelo Williams, went to Will Johnson, so it was potentially a vulture situation there. I feel like Le'Veon Bell would have gotten that goal line touch, so it's not that much to worry about. Again, receivers did well. Antonio Brown, Heath Miller with 84 yards. Darius Bay 58 yards. Really, it was one long catch and then a couple of dump-offs. He had a few big drops. He also dropped a touchdown, or didn't drop a touchdown pass, but stepped out of bounds on what could have been a touchdown pass in the second quarter. Marcus Weeden had 3 catches. Had a nice catch down the sideline, but again, it wasn't as targeted as I think he should have been, or I think as we anticipated. But he did also have a 2-point conversion, which gives you 2 fantasy points. So 7.5 for a game. Again, not great. Not where we would have liked to see him, especially because he's 4th on the pecking order instead of 2nd or 3rd. I really would have expected him to be 2nd and be the recipient of the deep balls, but that went to Hayward Bay. So, Jacoby was 2 for 4 on field goals, 7 total points. 2 field goals, 6 points, and an extra point. There was no lost fumbles on either side. Only 1 interception by Ben Roethlisberger. 4 touchdowns by Tom Brady. So we've gone through this. A good start to the fantasy football season. but not a really high-scored game. Not a whole lot going on, but I think it will pick up. So the next, let's just go through the Sunday matchups that I want to look at and target. I'm not going through every game because that would take probably longer than I can stand. Actually, before we go through that, I'm gonna take a short break and just let you guys I'm not gonna stop the stream. I'm just gonna get up, and then I'm gonna come back and we'll talk through the games that I've highlighted. There's only a couple games. We're gonna go through Indiana, Buffalo, Green Bay, Chicago. What's the other game? New Orleans, Arizona. The Giants at Dallas, and Philly at Atlanta. Because those games are probably going to be high scoring. Some of them are going to be blowouts, which are good. Because blowouts, you get a lot of passing, you get a lot of yardage, unless you're looking for a running back. Usually, in these scenarios, high-value running backs are on the blowing out team and not the team that's getting blown out. But we'll be right back and keep going with Fantasy Football Talk Show. And we're back. So we're going to go through a couple of the games and then players to watch, some fantasy value games that I see. Let's start off with fantasy value games. Buffalo Indians a game to watch. The fantasy value games that I've tagged are two games, one late Sunday, one on Monday, and then one of the early games. The early game is Green Bay, Chicago. And the reason that game I feel is going to be interesting is because of the fact that the Bears defense looks very bad this year. Why it looks bad is you just have several players on the Bears team who have departed. They're without a very good linebacking core. They got mauled during the preseason, and it looks like the Bears just aren't going to be able to keep up with teams, especially a team with Aaron Rodgers as the starting quarterback. So start anybody on the Packers. Eddie Lacy is going to have a good game because I think the Packers are going to get ahead early and ride Eddie Lacy once they have a 2-touchdown lead. Aaron Rodgers is going to be great, as always. I feel like he's done really good against the Bears in the past, and I don't see that trend abating anytime soon. And then you have players like Matt Forte, Jay Cutler. Matt Forte is an interesting player. He gets a lot of back out of the backfield passes, so he's not a player that I would say, oh, be cautious of. You probably spent a first-round pick on Matt Forte, so you have to play him. I just wouldn't expect all that much from him because really I feel like the Bears are going to be behind by so much that they're going to have to throw a lot. And Jay Cutler is not a great option, but if you're in a league, some leagues that require you to play 2 fantasy quarterbacks or start 2 quarterbacks or a custom league, he's not the worst option just because I feel like the Bears are going to be throwing often. At the same time, Jay Cutler is really prone to interceptions. So that's something that you're going to have to take into account. And honestly, there are much better options out there. But if you have Jay Cutler on your team, another player to look at is Alshon Jeffrey. Alshon Jeffrey is right now a player who a lot of people had in their drafts as being a very high pickup. The reason being is Brandon Marshall is now with the New York Jets, and Brandon Marshall was the go-to chain mover, but Alshon Jeffrey still was a big play potential threat, great hands, made some phenomenal catches last season. But this season was primed to become the #1 wide receiver target. What we instead have is him entering the season listed as questionable going into the opener, playing in a limited fashion. Eddie Royal is a player that one of my friends was talking about this weekend, whether or not he should pick Eddie Royal up. Eddie Royal and Jay Cutler have played together before in Denver. Eddie Royal is a slot guy, a Julian Edelman-like player, where he's going to get you a lot of catches, not a lot of yards, but might get a lot of yards after the catch. And in a game where the Bears are going to be playing from so far behind, Royal might be a very good play. Alshon Jeffrey being out there either not at 100% or, as listed as questionable, maybe not out there at all. If he's not out there at all, play Eddie Royal. If he is out there, still probably play Eddie Royal. Eddie Royal is a good flex this week, and probably the Bears player that I would use. Other than that, I would say just understand that it's probably going to be a very rough game for the Chicago Bears. So if you're a Bears fan, I'd look away. I can see this one getting ugly. Like backups in the fourth quarter for Green Bay ugly. So much so that James Starks actually might have some value because the Packers might simply try to run out the clock at some point. So there's that game. The second game that I think that as we progress is the New York Giants versus the Dallas Cowboys. Now, as much as I'd like to see the Giants win this game, the Giants start off seasons very, very slowly. So one of the things that I think they're going to have to do to stay competitive is really, really put up a lot of points and control the ball. So Odell Beckham Jr. becomes important. Victor Cruz, I just saw, was listed as out this week, as you can see here. He's ruled out for week 1. He was considered a long shot to play anyway, but he's ruled out for week 1. So Victor Cruz, if you have him in your lineups, get him out. Get him out of your lineups. Look for a replacement. Look for somebody to pick up the slack, because Victor Cruz is out this week. But as much as the Giants are my team, it's tough to see them beating the Cowboys in Dallas. And the Giants' defense is really all over the place right now. They don't have a linebacking core. They really don't have any proven safeties. They have decent corners, a very good line. But I see Dallas, especially Des Bryant, having a great game. Tony Romo probably has a good value play. As does Eli, because I feel like the Giants will be behind, or the Giants' offense has been able to move the ball, especially if you look at the end of last season when Odell Beckham was on the field. Odell Beckham provides Eli Manning value, even with Victor Cruz not out there. Another player that provides you some value is actually Ruben Randle. Now that we know Victor Cruz is out, we look at who's going to fill that void. What do I think about Rashad Jennings drinkling? I I would say Rashad Jennings is not the running back to own in the Giants' backfield. He's going to be the main ball carrier, but in terms of yardage, he's not going to get the back out of the backfield passes because that's where Shane Vereen's going to come in. And I feel like this is going to be a game where the Giants are going to be playing from behind. Rashad Jennings may be looking at like 55 yards, maybe 10, 15 receiving yards on one screen pass. But I feel like it's going to be a lot of shotgun sets with Shane Vereen as the back out of the backfield, because I feel like Dallas is just going to jump on an early lead because the Giants' defense is so fresh. It's kind of hard to dictate, but Rashad Jennings, even looking back at last year, is a player who really does well in certain games. Like, he had a really good game last year against, like, Jacksonville, a team that, you know, the Giants could get on. And even though they ended up losing that game, Rashad Jennings had a very good start to the game. He got a lot of handoffs, a lot of carries. The Giants are going to want to try to stay balanced, but because of how I see the game going, I don't think Rashad Jennings is your best play. On the other side of the ball, the Dallas running back situation, without the Giants having a linebacker, the Dallas running backs should have a good matchup, but you just don't know which running back is going to get the most carries. Most of the money's on Josh Randall, but Joseph Randall, I'm sorry. Jennings looked good in the preseason game against the Jets. The Giants' O-line is getting better, but at the same and I think they're a better pass protecting line than they are at creating holes. And I think that's just because of their youth. You have players who are quick. They drafted their last two drafts of first round have been O-linemen. Odell Beckham was a first-round pick last year, but they had two. So they also got an O-lineman in Schubert last year. So they have a strong O-line in terms of pass protection. And that's going back to their new style of offense that they introduced last year, their West Coast offense that they brought over with the offensive coordinator from Green Bay, the quarterback coach, I'm sorry, from Green Bay. So it's quick passes, and that's going to allow the O-line to kind of stand up keep Eli up. But at the same time, it doesn't give Jennings a lot of great holes. Jennings has the speed to do something with, but you have now a Dallas D that has Sean Lee back, that has some talent on the linebacker side that they haven't had in a while. Dallas is weak at corner and safety. They're without Skandrick, who's down for the season. They're a team that is based upon their middle. So Jennings and Andre Williams being there, give them the ball, plow ahead kind of backs. I just don't see the Giants' O-line being able to really move Dallas enough to control that line of scrimmage. I would like to be surprised, especially as a Giants fan. I would like to be surprised, but I don't see this week being one in the trenches on either side of the ball. Dallas has a great offensive line for running the ball, but do they have a running back that can take advantage of it? Joseph Randall didn't impress me. Darren McFadden has flashes where he looks like the Darren McFadden of maybe 4 years ago, but it's hard to say either of them is, popping off the page, and that's obvious because Dallas went out and traded for a running back, so you know that this isn't a team that is sure of their situation. So, in looking at this game, I think it's going to be a good game from a fantasy perspective. You have two teams with several viable options. On the Giants side, Eli Manning, Odell Beckham Jr., obviously. I see Shane Vereen having a good game in terms of PPR standpoint. Ruben Randall is a player, if you're in the need of a flex, that might have a solid game, especially because with Victor Cruz out, he's going to be the wide receiver number 2. He's also going to be the person who's not getting double cover. Hopefully McFadden, since I own him. Yeah, the Giants situation is really Victor Cruz would have solidified the Giants situation a lot in my mind, because he would give Odell Beckham Jr. some kind of relief. I still feel Odell Beckham Jr. runs too many good routes and has too much speed, and the Cowboys' defensive back situation is just not that strong. So I still think he'll have a really good game. Like you said, he'll have a really good game. But it would have been nice if they would have had to pay attention to somebody else, like a Victor Cruz, who can run a great slot route, who can, get a lot of good catches. I don't know if it hurts or helps Odell Beckham Jr.'s value. Odell Beckham Jr. is probably going to do him regardless. Jets fan? Jets, I'm actually high on a couple of the Jets. I really like Brandon Marshall. I like him a lot more that Geno Smith is not throwing him the football. And I think the Jets defense has a... Yes, I did see that in the preseason game. The sideline grab where he basically tried to give it to Revis. Odell Beckham Jr. is really, really talented. There's no denying that. And as a Giants fan, I'm really happy he's going to be wearing the Giants uniform for a while. And he helps nothing. He really helps the Giants' fantasy value. And really helps the running back situation, because for a couple of years now, the Giants have been in this post-Brandon Jacobs. They've always had the problem. Yeah, fine if he's the only wide receiver out there. He's a player that you can't cover. He's got speed, he's got athleticism, and he runs such precise routes that he's going to get open. But the Giants' situation at running back is much improved because of their diversity, but it hurts them from a fantasy perspective, because ever since Brandon Jacobs left, they haven't had one running back here where you're sure that he's going to get the most totes. But it should be an interesting game, and I'm hoping it's going to be a close game, but it has the potential to be a really high-scoring game. So from a fantasy perspective, that's a great thing for you. The other game that I want to look at is Philadelphia versus Atlanta, which will be a shootout. Philadelphia is going to score in pretty much every way possible. I think DeMarco Murray is going to score. I think Ryan Matthews is going to score. I think Sam Bradford is going to be a top 5 quarterback this week. Atlanta just has a bad defense. They lost 2 of their linebackers. Witherspoon's gone. It's just a bad situation for them. Chris Ivory will be a top 10 running back, in my opinion. I like Chris Ivory. I've liked him since he was a Saint, honestly. I thought that he outplayed Mark Ingram as a Saint. He has a very strong between the tackles game that fits the Jets system. And the Jets have historically had a really good run blocking offensive line. Yeah, I mean, I would stay I stay far away from Eric Decker. I drafted Brandon Marshall after Geno Smith was knocked out for the first few weeks, because in my opinion, I think that Ryan Fitzpatrick is a good enough quarterback. He's not a great quarterback, but if you look at what he did in Buffalo, he had a decent run at times before he had injury problems that kind of lost him the starting job, and that led into E.J. Manuel getting there. I think Ryan Fitzpatrick is a good enough quarterback that he knows what every quarterback who has ever... Brandon Marshall's had quarterbacks who are just not great. Ryan Tannehill was an okay quarterback. Jay Cutler was an okay quarterback. I don't think Ryan Fitzpatrick is at that level, but he's not drastically behind them. You're not talking about Brandon Marshall going from an Aaron Rodgers or a Peyton Manning all the way down to, a mid-20s quarterback. And Brandon Marshall is a reception receiver, so he'll get in a position where you can throw him the ball and he'll secure it. He's like Anquan Bolton. You don't need a quarterback who's pretty or who's exceedingly accurate. You just need a quarterback who knows that you're the man to target. And I think that's where that's where Brandon Marshall sits. Eric Decker is a player that I avoided, and I know a lot of people avoided. Because I think with Brandon Marshall there, that takes away from Eric Decker's value. Just because Eric Decker used to be the only option, now he's not the only option, and I don't see Eric Decker being hugely valuable. I think he was made by Peyton Manning, and now that he's not in, he's the player who went from a top tier quarterback to kind of that mid-level, lower percentage of the league, and he's struggled ever since. But yeah, I'd agree with you. Chris Ivory is going to have a good season. I don't know, top 10. Yeah, I mean he's the running back to own in New York. In New York, I will still use the ground and pound. So it's close, but I think that there's a couple of players that I think are going to surprise. One of the players that I like, who I think is going to be a top 10 running back, who a lot of people were down on in the preseason, but then saw him in the preseason and are now starting to get high on him, is Doug Martin. Good situation in that the Buccaneers improved the line because they got a franchise quarterback, they think, in Jameis Winston. But Martin's in a contract year. He's lost weight. He's in great shape. He's healthy. And he made some flat-out great runs in the preseason, breaking multiple tackles, bursting past people. He's a running back who, in the preseason, he was amazing. Actually, I might be able to pull up, let's see if we can pull up a clip real quick of Doug Martin in the preseason. And he's behind a better line than he has been for several years. Let me see. Why can't I find it? Tampa Bay. Let's see. It was, I'm trying to remember the week. Actually, I can probably just go to players. Yeah, like some of these plays, and I'll make this full screen so that everybody can see them.
First and 10. It is
so you have Doug Martin, who Bengals have a good defense. He's escaping tackles. He's got speed. He's got burst. He's got a lot better.
That's what you were talking about, John. But Doug Martin,
it just looks like he has more confidence than he has had in several.
He was unbelievable.
Is there a competition?
But watch him off the right side. He's going to
people thought Charles Sims was going to do something, but he kind of got completely erased in terms of his play during the preseason. He just didn't have the burst. He didn't have the ability that Martin showed.
Something Winston and
so
the Bucs offense
you have
Doug Martin
running back in Martin who is showing flashes of what he was able to do before. And if he can come anywhere near to that kind of athleticism again, especially with a team that has weapons like Mike Evans on the outside, Vincent Jackson, you know, people who can take pressure off of him, a quarterback who has some versatility.
Doug Martin showing the quickness that he's shown all preseason,
he's running through tackles. So they're not going to want to put him in too
I'm going to make this tackle, and Doug said, "Get out of my face." 19-yard touchdown for the Bucs.
I feel like Doug Martin's
a way to get this thing going again.
Good team player to own, and if you have a backfield of Doug Martin and Chris Ivory, those two players probably didn't cost you that much, or not that early in the draft. So I think that you're in probably good shape. I think you're in good shape. You could probably flex one, and then whoever your first couple picks were, go with that. But I have Doug Martin as a flex in a lot of my leagues. He was somebody in a couple leagues I actually reached for. Not reached, I'm talking like 8th round. But I think that he's going to impress people. The key for him is to stay healthy. His backups are Sims and Rainey. Rainey, I think, would be the one who would provide some competition because he has a Darren Sproles kind of ability to him. He's very elusive. He's a smaller running back. He gets through holes well. He does have good hands to catch passes out of the backfield. And if he was to go down, I would say that Rainey over Sims, just based on their play. Sims was last year, they thought he was going to compete and take over this job. But I don't see that happening, especially after how high the Buccaneers seem to be on Martin now. And he's kind of flown under the radar, so if you're still drafting, I don't know if anybody else, I've seen a couple of viewers coming in and out. If you're still drafting, I say go for Doug Martin. Chris Ivory, another player to go for, as Drinking is saying. Those are kind of, the running back position this year is going to be very interesting because you have, I think, more running backs than you have in the past couple of years being number ones. There's been a lot, there was this move to the committee situation, and then you saw teams find stars, find a DeMarco Murray, or find a player that, you know, could stay healthy for all season and who they could hammer the ball to. Your Arian Fosters, your Jamal Charles. I know Arian Foster's still hurt, but he probably is coming back sooner rather than later. Bench Martin this week, Forte, McCoy, and Ivory as your stars. Yeah, you obviously, yeah, you do what I do. You draft a lot of running backs. Any handcuffs or RB sleepers that you have any thoughts on? Martin was kind of a sleeper. Ivory, let me see some of the early drafts that I did. Denard Robinson, maybe. T.Y. Yeldon is on that team too, so that's not really that good. Latavius Murray, I know some people have as high hopes on. One handcuff that I think you should watch out for, and that I've seen several people drop this week, is actually, I think it's this league that they dropped somebody. Yeah, a lot of people are dropping Niles Davis this week, either because they drafted him as a handcuff to Jamal Charles and simply needed another player, or drafted him for thinking that the team was deep enough that they could wait. Jamal Charles is a player that always scares me because of his injury history. Obviously, you can't think that your player is going to go down. You can't build your fantasy team around that injury threat. But if there's a handcuff to have in the National Football League, it's Niles Davis. Because it's not going to be like if Jamal Charles goes down, the Chiefs are suddenly going to become a passing team. They just aren't. Alex Smith throws perhaps the most 5-yard passes in the National Football League. I don't know if I've ever seen him really air it out. And that just means that they're, like last season, the Kansas City Chiefs didn't have a wide receiver score a touchdown. I think that's going to change with Macklin now on the team. But still, you're talking about a team that really isn't built to throw. So if there's any handcuff to own, it's Niles Davis. On to, if I'm looking at just your team drinking, Forte's pretty durable. He's had some injury bugs in the past, but I feel like with the depth of your team, it doesn't really make sense to handcuff him. McCoy, again, it would have made sense if Fred Davis was still there, but now that he's gone, check out Frank Gore's backup, Josh Robinson. Okay, yeah, from on the Colts. The Colts have a couple of players like that. Like Dante Moncrief is the wide receiver that I'm thinking of. And mainly it's just because the same situation. You have an older veteran kind of star. Frank Gore is, an older veteran running back. But the same thing at wide receiver. You have an older veteran wide receiver in Andre Johnson. And then you have Dante Moncrief, who showed up last season alongside T.Y. Hilton. So I think that Josh Robinson, yeah, that's interesting. That's not a name I would have immediately thought of, but in terms of the team comp, that makes a lot of sense. Another running back who's kind of in that same vein is... I'm not going to remember his name now. Backup running back. Terrence West. I know it seems kind of crazy because he was the kind of third man out in Cleveland, but Bishop Sankey just did not impress last year. He was a high draft pick. They went out and got Terrence West in the waiver cut time period. He's listed 4th on the depth chart, but Dexter McCluster's a pass out of the backfield back. Yeah, they just cut Herron and Ballard is injured. Yeah, Ballard I wouldn't touch. Herron cut that makes sense. So yeah, it points to them trusting Robinson. Yeah, and Frank Gore is durable, but I think that, like you say, going into the Colts are a team that frankly is going to be in the position to kind of mess with their offense a little bit. They're going to have the ability to, because they're going to be so far ahead in their division, I don't see anybody challenging them. By the end of the season, Frank Gore, they won't shut him down, but I feel like if they're going to be a team that's I think their goal is Super Bowl. They're going to be a team that is going to be looking to spell Andre Johnson. So they're not going to see as many snaps as you might be used to. So a player like Robinson is going to get carries, and then if he impresses, deep league, he could be there. Yeah, the only reason I would look to the Titans is for value. Like you said, this is a deeper league. And one of the other things that I like running backs that are paired with a rookie quarterback. And the reason is a lot of times rookie quarterbacks or even younger quarterbacks don't understand every NFL read. So coaches have narrowed the playbook. And when you narrow playbooks, one of the things that you can do is shorten the distance that quarterbacks have to make decisions. And if you can get into a 3rd and 5 instead of a 3rd and long, then you put your rookie quarterback in a much better position for success. They did it with RG3 a couple of years ago. RG3's great year coincided with one of Alfred Morris's best seasons. And it's just that correlation with a young quarterback tends to lean on his running back to give him relief. He also tends to check down instead of to a tight end, which he does. A lot of rookie quarterbacks' tight ends are highly valued too, but they tend to check down to 1 or 2 players. They either tend to check down to their tight end, who's an outlet, or check down to a running back who's an outlet in wider sets. So Tennessee has Mariota as the rookie quarterback. So I'm looking in that backfield to see who emerges as a, viable option. And one of the reasons I like Terrence West is he had some good games in Cleveland with really bad offenses. Not really great offensive lines, but obviously Isaiah Cromwell kind of took that over, and then you had the Cleveland's backfield was just very deep, so he kind of became the 3rd man out. But he had the talent, and that's the important thing. The talent transfers over, and you're dealing with Tennessee, a team that probably won't go very far this year, and will be looking to see what they have going forward. And obviously, you don't want to take too many risks with Mariota. You don't want him dropping back 40 times to get hit behind an offensive line that's not that great, with receivers who may or may not be able to get open. So I'm looking for a running back in that backfield, and I think Terrence West might be it. But again, this is deeper league, later in the season, seeing where these teams are. And there's two more players that I want to watch. I talked about Mariota. Another player that is, I think, one to watch is not necessarily to watch whether or not he is going to be good, but whether or not he can sustain, is Peyton Manning. Peyton Manning didn't have a really good preseason. There's all these reports about he can't feel his fingertips on his throwing hand. It looked like it cost him a little bit in terms of average draft position this year. People hearing those rumors. Well, not rumors, those reports. And just seeing whether or not he can sustain his ability of being one of the better quarterbacks in fantasy football. He lost Julius Thomas, who gave him some tight end with a lot of ability. So now we're looking at whether or not Peyton Manning can continue. And he has a really solid test in his first week. He's going up against Peyton Manning. I already knew this, and now I'm forgetting. Baltimore. Baltimore's defense. And Baltimore's defense obviously isn't good as it has been in some prior years, like when their Super Bowl runs. But they still have really good linebackers and a line that gets after the quarterback. So it's going to be interesting to see just where Peyton Manning is. And if you have Peyton Manning, as I do in one league, it's going to be interesting to see if he was worth the pick. I think that the division that he plays in is going to make it very good for him for most weeks. But just to see where he's at. Is he going to give you the massive fantasy points? Like last year, week 1, I think he scored, 40 fantasy points. He had 6 touchdowns. It was just came out guns a-blazing. If he does that this year, great season, not really much to worry about. But it's a player that didn't really show that he was still there. And I'm not that worried about Peyton Manning, but he's just a player to you look at. Another player that I'm going to be interested in seeing, and this is kind of a sleeper, not much anymore, but was earlier in the preseason, Tyrod Taylor. A lot of people are using him for their weekly leagues because he's a minimum cost quarterback. He's a running quarterback. Kind of regret Cam Newton. I think Cam Newton, if he could do... Last year, Cam Newton had Kelvin Benjamin. Kelvin Benjamin's a great receiver. But even without him, I don't feel like Cam Newton's going to have that much of a dip. One of the things that I talked about, I don't know if you were here drinking, but one of the things we talked about really early on was the Patriots-Pittsburgh game and how D'Angelo Williams looked. The Panthers are used to running a lot of rushing plays. And with Jonathan Stewart as their kind of only viable back right now, I feel like they're going to have Cam move a little bit more. Now, whether or not that means he's just moving on bootlegs to throw, but we all know if Cam moves on a bootleg to throw, there's a 50-50 chance that he's going to end up taking off. The Panthers' defense is good enough to keep them in games, and I think that that's going to mean the play calling is going to be more conservative. You're not going to have Kelvin Benjamin in the red zone. I think that's where it hurts Cam. But I'm kind of high on Devin Funchess. He's their high draft pick. He's the player that everybody in camp was saying has better route running than Kelvin Benjamin did, who is a hybrid player. He's a 6'4" receiver who can run a 4.35. He's the player who can stretch the defense, who can take advantage of Cam's huge cannon of an arm. So I want to see if Funchess gets there. I drafted him in a couple leagues as like a wide receiver 5, potentially being able to, use as a flex. But I don't see Cam taking a huge regression. I know a lot of people are saying he's going to, but as long as Cam is healthy, there's as long as Cam is healthy, he's a athletic specimen that just doesn't come around a lot. He's a player, like, you look at his stat line and be like, oh, he only had 1 touchdown pass and he threw 2 interceptions. Oh, but he ran for 65 yards and a touchdown. Oh, like, that's his afterthought. He will get those yards. And especially now that you don't have a D'Angelo Williams and it's just Jonathan Stewart, I think you're going to see a lot more red zone Cam calling his own number or Cam going to Greg Olsen. So I don't see Carolina taking a huge step back, especially because they play in the NFC South, and those are 6 guaranteed high-scoring games for you as a Cam Newton owner, because nobody in the NFC South has a defense, except for Carolina. So I know you might regret it, and I think there are other quarterbacks that you might look at later. Sam Bradford, you might be able to get him cheap from somebody early on, like right now, because people are still worried about his injury history. So they drafted him, and then they might be regretting it too. Obviously not trading Cam for Sam Bradford, but, you know, some players who might be available are Tyrod Taylor. I've seen Colin Kaepernick available in smaller leagues, like 10-team leagues. Another running quarterback, but Colin Kaepernick has the benefit of, I've only paid 5 for Cam. If you're gonna get him that cheaply, I don't see passing him up either. Especially with what you got as running backs. With what you got as running backs, I would be pretty happy. I think that that's where my money would have gone to. But Tyrod Taylor is a player that you might want to keep an eye on, just because Buffalo does have some receivers if they ever get healthy. Sam, and 2-point plays, I know this is, we saw it last night too. Marcus Whedon got a 2-point reception, and Ben Roethlisberger got a 2-point pass. And then part of it has to do with the fact that you have kickers like Sweezum who missed the first 2 field goals, and now the Pittsburgh Steelers are trying to play catch-up. Chip Kelly is going to probably run a lot more 2-point plays than anybody else in the league, but we already saw it, the 2-point plays helping somebody in fantasy. Marcus Whedon went from having a mediocre fantasy right at 5.5 to 7.5, which is not great, but for a wide receiver 3, it's not terrible either. It's flexible, it's usable, it's not a waste. And now this is a Thursday night game. You get out ahead, you have some points. It's not terrible. But yeah, Sam Bradford, I think, is going to be for Sam Bradford's price and draft status. Yeah, the Panthers open to 2-point plays. The Panthers have the coach who would do it. I mean, Chip Kelly is, Chip Kelly. He runs a lot of unorthodox stuff, but Ron Rivera is the gambling coach of gambling coaches. So if there's a coach if there's a chance to run a 2-point play in the flow of the game, like that makes sense, Ron Rivera is going to do it. But the last thing to watch, I think, and then I gotta get out of here, is New Orleans. New Orleans has gone. I have a lot of my friends are from New Orleans and the New Orleans area and are all Saints fans, and they keep saying that they have no idea what the Saints are going to be doing this season. This Saints offseason, they got rid of Kenny Stills. They said basically that we are going to focus on the running game. We are going to draft line. We are going to give an extension to Mark Ingram. We are going to we're going to trade away Jimmy Graham, get a center. I do think Kaepernick should be rostered. I think, if you have a Cam Newton, I think Kaepernick's going to be better than people give him credit for. He still has Bolden, even though Bolden's older. And Kaepernick is in a system now where the 49ers defense is not going to be as strong as they once were, which is going to lead them to lean more on their offense to provide them something, to provide them points. So Kaepernick is not a player who's going to wow you with his accuracy, but he does have arm strength. He still can run. You have Carlos Hyde, who's a younger running back. So you have a team that fits his strengths. You have Vernon Davis, who's going to be coming into this season healthy. Vernon Davis's players slipped in drafts a lot this year too, but Vernon Davis is coming to the season healthy, so he has some of his playmakers back. You don't have Frank Gore, but Carlos Hyde has shown that he can be impressive. He can be a good running back. He's the running back that probably got taken later. I got Carlos Hyde in, I think, one league. Yeah, backup quarterbacks, unless you have somebody that you're really confident about, keep your backup quarterback mind open. I mean, in my mind, there's a couple of players. Flacco is a player that some people have rostered, some people haven't. He's rostered most of my leagues. I think one he's like out there, but that's a smaller 10-team league. But Kaepernick's another player who I think in the same league is not rostered. But like there are some players who, especially in the quarterback position, I want a backup quarterback who is going to give me. Backup quarterbacks aren't going to be in really high-powered offenses, so you either want a backup quarterback who is like a Cam version, who will get you points as a runner, like Kaepernick or Tyrod Taylor, or is in just such a good system, or has a player like, for last year, a lot of the season, Eli wasn't rostered. And then once Odell Beckham Jr. started, a lot of people started picking up Eli. And the reason was that you have the ability to run off of that star power. One team that's kind of interesting that I don't think a lot of people are talking about are the St. Louis Rams. And they don't have a quarterback worth a damn, but they have talent everywhere else. Like, I don't know if Austin Davis is worth anything, but they have potentially Trey Mason, potentially Gurley, potentially Kenny Britt, Jared Cook, and Brian Quick, along with Trayvon Austin. They have the talent around a quarterback to do something. So whether it's Austin Davis or whether it's somebody they bring in or whether it's one of their backups who ascends to that position, that's a team that you might want to look at as a backup potential because that team has talent other places. They have a defense that can keep them in games. That means that their quarterback's going to not be in the position where he can't beat them. He's got to throw short. He's got to throw checkdowns. He's got to look to his really good backs out of the backfield. And he'll be in a position where he'll have short fields, where he can look to a tight end like Jared Cook, or look to a slot guy like Trayvon Austin to get that 5-yard pass and then turn it into the touchdown. So that makes the team, interesting, and I think that makes owning that backup potentially something that you could look to. But yeah, I think that's actually all that I have for this week. Shorter. But what days do I normally stream? Yeah, this is a Friday football talk show. I'm gonna probably be adding another day during the week. Getting a Twitter thing started, so next week I'll have my Twitter thing on there so you can follow. But it's gonna be show is gonna take place every Friday. It's gonna start at 6 o'clock. I was trying to do it earlier, but most likely it's going to start at 6 o'clock after most people get off work. But I thank you for hanging out, drinking, and it's been good talking to you. You provided really good insight. You definitely know what you're doing. But yeah, I think that the more people we get, the better discussion we're going to have, and that's going to be it for me. Yeah, Wednesdays going into Thursday night games. I was thinking about that. I was thinking about potentially that or Tuesday, because Tuesday is a day that you're just coming off the Monday nighter, your week's kind of wrapping up, and then Tuesday you would also be able to talk about waiver wire stuff. So I'm thinking about adding a show then, but definitely look for me next Friday, and then hopefully in the future I'll start to add more shows during the week, at least one more show during the week. And on this channel I also play some other games, so I'll be on and around, but again, I'm going to be adding a Twitter to this banner, adding a Twitter to the description, so that people can follow and kind of get more questions out there, and then hopefully we can start, you know, answering some questions on stream, you know, taking questions from other places, and kind of grow kind of this fantasy community on Twitch, because I think that there's a lot of overlap. A lot of gamers play fantasy football, and a lot of people are interested in the NFL and want to talk about it. Thank you guys for hanging out. Thanks for coming into the chat. Thanks for chatting. Thanks for being active. And I'll see you guys next week, definitely. Talk to you later.